This is the OMG Book Show with William O'Day, episode number 18.
Welcome to the OMG Book Show, where it's all about taking you into the brains of fantastic authors. No scalpels required. It's more than an interview, it's an experience. And now, your host, William O'Day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show today. Today is all about beards. Beards, you ask? Yeah, that's a logical question to ask, right? It's because you see, personal update time, I am growing a beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous winter beard right now at this moment. It's as thick and luxurious as a bear's pelt, you might say, which, maybe that's too much for some people. I've been hearing from the different women in my life at this point that perhaps the beard is getting to be a little too fulsome, a little too grandiose in scope and appearance. However, at the same time, like last week, my wife said that I was starting to look like Zeus. I mean, are you trying to convince me to keep it and have it forever? Or are you starting to get tired of it? Anyway, I don't know. Maybe she looks at Zeus and she doesn't think the guy is like totally gorgeous and awesome looking. Anyway, that's enough about beards because this show is not about that. Maybe that'll be a different podcast. It'll be called, let's see it, Bravo Beards. And they would be up in lights, like in Hollywood on the side of a movie. What are they? The outside of the movie theater where they put the names of the shows and stars. Bravo Beards. Can you just see it? Probably not. Anyway, moving on. Today we talk with Robert Storey. It is a fascinating interview, and we get to hear about, he is a UK author that has the best-selling series, the Ancient Origins series. And if you didn't know already, these books are door stoppers. We go into kind of talking about it because I personally am absolutely impressed by it. And some of his books are 700-800 pages long. And he even actually tells us that a few of these books ended up at 1,500 pages, which is just, that's like the Odyssey, by Homer or something. It's crazy. And he actually had to split it down the middle because print-on-demand publishing for paperbacks and such isn't even possible. I think he mentioned something above like 800 pages, 850 or something. So anyway, we talk about that. We also talk about he has actually a unique medical condition, cervical dystonia, that he got a long time ago. And it put a huge damper on his life. And he just kind of talks about how he dealt with that and got through it and how actually that ended up getting him into writing. And it's kind of, he is a career that can make it work while also dealing with this big challenge in his life. He also tells us about an episode of writer's block that hit him square between the eyes and lasted, I think he mentioned something like 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 months in length, and just how hard it hit him. And he kind of delved into the reasons of like why something like that can happen. And then for him, what the strategies were to get through it, because that's, that could be a big challenge for writers. And then last but not least, and of course there's always more, but I talk about the time that I went to the Body Worlds exhibit. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's very cool. It is, actually, I'm not going to describe it here because we go into it in the interview, but I'll just give a hint that I nearly barfed at the exhibit. And if you know what it is, you probably understand why. In any case, you will hear all that and much more in the interview to come. So surgical gloves on, metaphorical scalpel in hand. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show today. I am super excited to be bringing you a best-selling author by the name of Robert Storey, who writes the Ancient Origins series, and he is on he's in England, so I'm going to say he's on the telly, or is that the television?
It can be the television.
First, let's just say thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Right on. And then to get back to that, to clarify, so the telly, is that the telephone or the television?
No, it's not the telephone. Yeah, it's definitely the television or the TV. We don't really say telly anymore. I think that's more sort of an older thing now, I would say.
All right, good. So thank you. I'm learning. And I always like to learn something every day. So that at least I've gotten one down for the day.
So it's interesting, some of the words, sort of difference between sort of the UK and United States, because I know most of my readers are over in the US, and I try and adapt my writing slightly, or some of the words sort of like sedan or saloon and sort of those sort of things. But it's difficult sometimes, and it comes out, my books come out as a bit of a mix, and I think it's difficult sometimes for readers to get their head around it. But I do try my best.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you about is, like, cause you have, and you can tell me if I have this right, but let's say on a car, you have a bonnet being the hood or what we would call the hood in the States. And then the boot being the trunk.
Yeah.
But you're saying you do go in as you ride and just try to kind of Americanize some of the phrasing?
A few, yeah, because there's like the pavement. I know you don't really use that, do you? Sort of the sidewalk more, isn't it, that you use?
Yeah. I think if you're referring kind of the sides of the road, safety, pedestrian, And
I think there's another one that I try and alter is torch and flashlight, and I know torch means sort of just a fire.
Yeah, like the fire at the end of a stick.
Yeah. And obviously over here we use, I don't know, we don't really differentiate, which isn't very good, is it? So flashlight is better. So I just use that one. So
right on.
But words like that. But it's interesting when but some of the things though, where I know you use pants for trousers, but that sounds really alien to me, so I just can't bring myself to put pants because that means underwear for me. And I have this vision of my characters all walking around in underwear, which is quite amusing. But
wait, do you guys use skivvies? Is that a term you use or no?
Skivvies?
Yeah.
I've heard the term. I don't particularly use it. I'm not sure exactly what that refers to be honest. But
okay, it's underwear, also underpants or whatever. But I think maybe that's more of a military term. Now I'm getting confused here.
You're right. Yeah.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. Is that when you're like your main character in or at least one of the main characters in your series, excuse me, is an English archaeologist.
Mm-hmm.
And so Sarah Morgan is her name. And I guess I'm assuming, being that that's in character for her, you let her say trousers and boot and bonnet and everything, or do you try to mix hers up as well?
No, if it's dialogues suitable for that character's nationality, then I'll keep it for that nationality. But if it's an American talking, then I'll try and switch it up. But I have been pulled up a few times, and I know there's a few things in my books which sometimes don't tally, probably because I'm not aware of it. I know someone's commented that I had, I think it was American referring to lads, and I don't think you use that term for sort of guys over there.
No, not unless we're trying to be cheeky or something.
Oh, right, yeah, it wasn't in the books. So it's some things like that. I don't particularly. If I don't know it, then I'm going to get it wrong. Unfortunately, it would be nice if Amazon. I've asked them, but they said they're trying to work on it. But if they could provide a different setting for US readers and UK readers, so then, you could have international English for sort of Australia and UK, and then you could have US English manuscript for the US audience, which would make sense, but they haven't done that yet, which is surprising, really. But
that would be pretty cool. I don't know how it works on your end. Do you, from the UK end, as an indie author, do you sign into like a UK KDP and publish in that way?
Yeah. That's how I do it. But I can't see why it'd be too much of a problem for them. I suppose there are, although thinking about it, there are like 2 million books or more on their site, isn't there? I suppose so. It could be a bit of a problem if they started allowing users to upload sort of multiple manuscripts. But
I think it's. I hadn't actually thought of it, but I think it's a great idea, and I think probably however many there are, 2-3 million books available. There's probably the vast majority of people would not go to the trouble of creating national versions of particular stories. So maybe it wouldn't add too much overhead, possibly.
No, I suppose I'd have to get them reworked, I suppose, with American copy edit, I suppose. But I think it'd be worth doing because I know it draws some people out of the flow of the story, which is obviously what we don't want, is it? So it would be nice to have it done, but so have to keep on.
Yeah, I think that would be a cool development. We'll put it in the Jeff Bezos suggestion box. I think it's right outside his door, at his office, maybe. Well, right on. I was actually this morning looking through the series and kind of just reading on Amazon what you had for it. And one thing that really hit me there was you write huge doorstopper books. I'm talking like the first one, Revelations, that's the one I'm currently in, is almost 500. And then it jumps up to 850 for book 2, and then back down around 500. And then I think I saw somewhere in Facebook that your book you're working on now is looking like 700-800. Is that right?
Well, the book, the book I'm writing, well, I'm just sort of prepping it for release soon. It's coming out next, sort of the end of March. I've actually turned it into 2 books because it was one book, but it got up to 1,500 pages, so it was just enormous. So I had to. There's just no, and especially on Amazon, there's no for their print-on-demand service for the paperbacks. I think they only do up to 800 pages. So if I was going to squeeze a 1,500-page book into 800 pages, it would be the size of like a newspaper, I think. So it'd just be ridiculous. So I had to. I've split. There is. I think it was. I did that with the last book as well. Actually, last 2 books were going to be one book, and they got up to sort of 1,450 pages, I think, as one book. But there was a perfect place to cut them in the middle again for the paperback constraints, basically. So I've had to do that again. But they work quite nicely as 2 books, and I think it's the ones I'm bringing out now. It is all one story, obviously, but it's just sort of in 2 books, a bit like sort of the George R.R. Martin with the Game of Thrones. I suppose some of his books are enormous, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it was like 3 and 4 or something are to be considered one book, or maybe 4 and 5, something like that.
Yeah, so it's sort of like that, really.
So what draws you, because it's an interesting take on it. I mean, if you look at a lot of indie writers these days, you know, the trend is more towards moving somewhere in the range of like 250, 300 page books, so that you can get the frequency and kind of the benefits of being in touch with the reader more frequently. But you're not even worried about that at all. So how'd you go about that?
Yeah, well, it was perhaps a stupid move on my part, but I don't know. I've just always liked or enjoyed just massive story arcs, really. I know it's annoyed some readers where my stories are sort of more of a continuum rather than sort of ending one book to the next, so to speak. There are resolutions, of course, in each book, but I'm more like, I enjoy and love large story arcs, sort of like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, those sort of things. I grew up with sort of Lord of the Rings. I used to love that as a kid, and obviously I just like big, enormous books to sort of lose myself in the story rather than sort of have the short. I think I have a problem as well. Obviously, some people find it much easier. I struggle to sort of fit my premise down into a shorter book, really, which isn't so great. So it's a skill I haven't learned to harness yet, and my characters kind of take over and lead me places perhaps I don't want to go sometimes. But
from the reviews I've read of your subsequent books, the length and scope and width of the adventure seems to be readers seem to be very enthusiastic about. So don't go short on account of what I'm saying.
Oh no, I'll keep on, keep on with it. I don't. That's the thing. I need to learn how to write shorter books. I've got sort of a couple of ideas for some thrillers coming out to come out in the future, but it'd be interesting to have a nice sort of shorter arc sort of for the book than the sort of. I think I've gone so epic on the Ancient Origins. It's so difficult to keep a hold of everything sometimes, and I'm writing the books now, although that I've just finished, and it's so difficult keeping it all together with the previous 4 books. And then I had to virtually plot out the entire, because I think there'll be 2 more books after the ones I'm just releasing. Wow. And I had to plot out sort of the final part of the series just so I could get a grip on everything, really. And it's gave me a few headaches, definitely.
Yeah, I imagine so. And these 2 books that you imagine come later to finish out the series, are these like enormous 500,000 page books as well?
They will be, but I've gone, the books that are just going to come out, I've gone pretty massive on the scope of what I've sort of entered into. So hopefully I'm a bit more than I can chew, but they will be large. Yeah, I think it's unavoidable. And
the 2 that you're talking about, are these the ones that come out in March, the 10th Protocol, and then I guess what comes after that?
Yes, the 10th Protocol that's pre-order now and then released fully on the 31st of March on Amazon, and then The Lost Prophet I'll release at the same time, and then that will come out, so they'll both be available to read at the same time. I didn't really want to leave any gap between them, seeing as they're really one book, sort of, rather than two. So I wanted to make sure readers weren't angry when they got to the end of the first book and there wasn't any, because there's not really any kind of resolutions for the first book. I think it's 640 pages, but the resolutions all come in the second book. But
in the second 640 pages.
Yeah, well, no, I think it's about 850. I think the second. But it's about the same size as the second book in the series, The Dark Descent. But,
man, those are. I'm amazed and wonder by the because that takes, as you're kind of implying with some of the things you said there, that takes a level of attention to detail and just simple gumption to keep getting moving through it, because it can get so big it can feel like it's going to fall on you.
Oh yeah. I have. It has been really. I have to say, I didn't realise how much stress and sort of pressure I'd put on myself over the last sort of 2 years getting it done until I'd finished at Christmas, and it was the biggest relief I've ever had. I think it was just, I didn't realise how much pressure I'd put myself under doing it. But
right. I had an interview with Michael Stephen Fuchs where he was talking about finishing a 15 book series with also kind of I think it was in a similar range, like maybe 700 page book. And he was just describing a similar way, like just especially when you get to the end of a series and you have this epic scope and lots of characters and you're trying to tie everything together and it feels impossible a lot of the time.
Yeah. 15 books. Wow. I'm only halfway there.
Well, I think you could probably, your books lengthwise or whatever I think you equal at least an 8 book series, maybe 10 even.
Maybe, yeah. I suppose if you sort of split them up a bit more, I suppose, yeah.
Well, I wanted to get kind of one of the things I like to do to start an interview is just get a sense of where you as a writer first began your journey. So how did you first get into storytelling?
Yes, I suppose I really I started reading, obviously, as a lot of us do as kids, and I just loved reading as a child. Sort of, I don't know if you've heard of Dick King-Smith, the author.
I don't think so. What's the genre?
Just children's books, sort of. I can't really describe the genre. It's so long since I've read them now. I should have read up on it, shouldn't I, before I mentioned it to you? But and things like sort of C.S. Lewis and obviously Roald Dahl and authors like that. And then, but I didn't really think anything more of it that I could even sort of contemplate writing, really, until I sort of had I had a couple of car accidents when I was 19, I think it was, and then I've got this condition. It's called Cervical Dystonia, which is sort of a neurological condition, and that sort of took me out of work. I was sort of in so much pain and disabled by it. I was sort of went into voluntary redundancy at 24, I think. And then I was sort of housebound with it for about 10 years, I suppose, on and off. And there's no known cure for it at the moment. And obviously that was quite a dark period of my life. And I think after I'd got made redundant, I think it was 4 years into that, I thought, well, my life's not going anywhere. What can I do, sort of thing? So I wrote this sort of fantasy book. I didn't think anything of it for another 6 years, and then I let my dad read it, and he really enjoyed it. So I thought, maybe there's something in this, and that's when I sort of wrote Revelations. I think I wrote it in sort of the first draft in 6 weeks. I just banged it out, and I was in so much agony with my neck at the time. I had to actually write with the screen on the floor. I think because I was in so much agony, I had to write quite quickly to get through it. And I finished that off, and my parents read it, and they really enjoyed it. And then I reworked it a bit, tried to bring my writing up to a higher standard, because it was quite dreadful, I have to say. And then it went on from there, really. And I self-published. There's a book fair over here, London Book Fair. I tried to sort out the book around to some agents, and I I sent off my manuscript to loads of agents and got loads of rejections. I can't remember how many rejections I got.
And do you keep those, or do you just use them for kindling in the fireplace?
Yeah, no, I did keep them. I only got really 2 proper responses. Most of them were just the standard thing they send out to everyone. I got two out of about 40, I think, were actually sort of helpful information for me to improve my writing, which was very, very good of them. And I sort of took that on board and got out some more books and tried to educate myself more on my writing, and went on from there, really. So that's how it happened.
Right on. And then I think if I understand you correctly, you wrote a full novel at first, which you showed your parents, and that has never been released. Is that right?
Yeah. Dark Spheres, that's called. It's sort of a fantasy book. I think it was only about 300 pages or 250 pages, I think. But my writing was absolutely awful. So if I do ever publish it, I'm going to have to go through it and rework the whole thing, I think. But it would be nice to do it at some point, I think.
Well, have you ever, I mean, clearly you've got long form storytelling. That seems, at least maybe with this series and maybe as you as well, you've got that down. Have you ever tried writing short stories just to like kind of get your brain to think in those terms?
No, I do need to do that. Definitely. Definitely. Yes, I do need to do that because it would be nice to write a novella or 2. And maybe, just some shorter books, really. It would just be a relief to write a short book for a change.
I mean, and for you, like a novella, at least at this point, sounds like a 250-page book, which many people would call a book.
Yeah. I thought that. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you might be right. So maybe I have to write even shorter. Oh, I don't know if I'm even capable of even imagining it.
Well, it does, or I guess maybe I was gonna say writing shorter would limit the expanse of the story, but I guess it doesn't necessarily, because then you could just have more books in the series, so you go on for it that way.
Yeah. Well, I think it could only help improve my writing because it's going to tighten your skill set, especially with the plot line itself, which obviously can only be beneficial because if you're going to write tighter work, then it can only help even on the longer ones, can't it? So right. I will have to bite the bullet, I suppose, and try and teach myself it at some point.
Well, how do you, writing these epic scope stories like this? There's, like you talked about, there's just a million details that end up coming into the story and that need attention at various points. How do you have a room that's basically looks like, like a serial killer, that where you have like things pasted on the walls and like yarn attaching details across the room to each other? How do you do it?
Maybe it would be easier. I did buy a sort of one of these whiteboards to help me with it, but I haven't actually used it for that, which was a bit stupid. But
wait, what does your whiteboard have on it right now? Big smiley face or?
Yeah, virtually. Yeah, not much relating to the books. It's more of like shopping lists maybe and stuff. But yeah. What I do is I normally just sort of sometimes I get a sort of a drawing pad and I write things down on that, and then I have sort of I think it's just sort of a painting program, and you can just put loads of text on there, sort of in a massive amount of text in sort of blocks, and then you can shift it around on screen, which I do. And then I do have trouble with it, and normally, unfortunately, by the time I finish writing the book and start the next one, I forgot how I did it on the previous one. So I'm always trying to write notes for myself how I actually do my process, so I don't forget the next time I do it. But,
maybe that's your process is rediscovering your process every time.
Yeah, maybe that is. Yeah, maybe it is. Yeah.
Speaking of process, how do you go about? Are you falling more on the side of like? People call it different things, but like writing into the dark or seat of the pants versus like more planned outlining architecture approach?
Yeah, it's difficult. The first book, Revelations, I had no plot at all for that. I had a very basic idea in my mind, and I just wrote it without virtually any notes at all. The books after that, I did try and start structuring So it was Seat of the Pants, I would say, the first book, definitely. I've added a couple of scenes since to tie it up, make it a bit tighter, but now I tend to plot more. I think I have to. The longer the book's gone on, because it's sort of all dependent on what's gone before. It's sort of captured me almost, and I can't escape it. And I've had to sort of totally plot everywhere to try and keep it all together. But
and that usually when you're having to plot to that degree, my guess is anyway, the subsequent books took significantly longer than 6 weeks to write.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. The last one I've just done, which I suppose you could say it's 1,500 pages. I suppose that's taken me 18 months to do that one.
Oh wow, yeah, that's a lot.
And then Dark Descent, I think that took me. That wasn't so bad because I only had one book to go on before that, so I didn't have to plot as much as I have done recently. That took me definitely over a year though, maybe 16 months, 14 months, I suppose. But yeah, not 6 weeks, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have a feeling like a future project that I want. I mean, I don't write books to the same length that you do. Probably not the same level of intricate detail either. But I do have numerous characters, kind of like ensemble casts, with some that are more starring than others. But then you have to kind of weave all of those together and figure out where they intersect in the plot at what points. And it does. It requires a lot more planning. So in the future, at some point, I want to just go and be like one person, maybe two at the most, as main characters, and then you just charge forward with their story.
Oh, yeah. I think I had a lot more fun writing the first book than I have the final books, I have to say, because I don't know. I think the plot it can restrict you sometimes. I think some of the best scenes I write normally come where my plot sort of runs out and I just have to go back to the Seat of the Pants style, and that's when it sort of seems to flow. And I think when you let it flow like that, you almost don't think, do you? And it just sort of comes out on the page, and I think that's when the best stuff happens sometimes. Yeah,
totally. And does that happen to you frequently? So it sounds like you, in these later books, for example, the last two, you had everything pretty well plotted out. But did you find when you get into a scene that then it just veers off in its own direction, or is it generally staying pretty close to what you have planned?
No, it can go a bit sideways sometimes, I have to admit. And I did make a big mistake with the book that I've just done, that I didn't actually plot the ending. Which obviously I thought I'd plot. Well, I plotted the ending for one lot of characters, and it's worked out perfectly, really. And then I'd sort of plotted out the other side of the other character arc, but I hadn't done it to the extent that I should have done. And when I got to sort of near the end of the book, I went, "Oh dear!" But it has panned out in the end, thankfully. But
that is one thing that's kind of amazing, right? Like you kind of, as you're charging forward with this plan and then the implementation of the plan, it's easy to paint yourself into a corner, and then. But it seems like you always figure out, like, once you get into that corner, like you do end up figuring out how to make it work. And then you're like, oh, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's good when that happens, isn't it? It's, you sort of think, well, there's no way I could have thought. I think the beauty comes when you're in the middle of the story. You get to a point where when you was plotting beforehand, you're in a totally different place and you're in the story, and then you can suddenly see these possibilities opening up and connections you wouldn't have seen before. Right. And I think that's when a beauty happens, I think, and you can then you can start to connect things together that you would have never have seen outside the plot, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it almost in some ways reminds me of writing when I wrote my first kind of, I guess, bigger novel. Okay, it's not going to be big compared to what you write. But the Darwin Protocol was like, I don't know, 300, 400 pages. But during the writing process, you had so many questions and like so much lack of clarity. But then once you get to the end, you're kind of like, oh, okay. And only looking back, do you realize, okay, now that's how that worked and I can redo that. It's, I guess the writing process itself brings illumination.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think it's like any art form or any job really, isn't it? You get into a zone and you just let it flow, and it just happens, doesn't it? Sometimes, almost like I suppose it's a bit like when you're driving, isn't it? And you don't have to think about driving; you're just driving and you go on autopilot. I think that's the same sort of zone, and a bit like sort of sports stars go into when they're playing their sport. They go into a zone, don't they? And I think that's the same with writing and anything, really, isn't it?
Right. And then, so I wanted to ask you. I was looking through on Amazon. You're working on the 5th and 6th books, but I noticed cover-wise, just in the imagery, your first 4 have kind of ethereal, sort of mysterious, magical look to them. But then the 5th one, the 10th Protocol, to me, you've got a Capitol building of some kind on there, and it looks very much like a departure, like a political thriller in some regards. Did you have that by design, or what's going on there?
Yeah. No, it's definitely once half of the book of these 2 books coming up will be similar to what's gone before, but they're both real big departures probably on what's happened previously, which I'm hoping people enjoy. I know a couple of people who've read it so far. They've sort of enjoyed it and said it's sort of a total, as you say, a total sort of departure to what's come before. It's still obviously totally in the same world, because it's I've sort of done world building with it. Which I suppose you'd more relate that to sort of fantasy books, wouldn't you? World building more than science fiction. Although I suppose science fiction does world building as well, doesn't it? So
yeah, I think so. To different degrees, for sure.
So, but yeah, there's a lot. There's a big political aspect to one side of it. Although I won't give too much away, but yeah.
At the end of the world, things tend to get a little political. That makes sense, actually. Speaking of the end of the world, going back to the first book, Revelations, I don't think I think it actually might even be in the description, but we have an asteroid hurling towards Earth that may or may not bring about the end of all things. I think that's not giving away anything, is it? Or
no, that seems fair enough. And the I think the difference between most asteroid stories is that there's obviously an archaeological aspect. That's the asteroid is sort of half the storyline, almost a quarter really when you get more into the book, and there's sort of the archaeological aspect is probably the greatest part of the storyline. But I know with the asteroid plot, it's more of a case that everyone knows this asteroid is coming and the world is prepared for it. And there's sort of the governments have sort of hidden from the public sort of these underground bases they've built all around the world in case the worst happens, sort of thing. But the whole world sort of knows about it, and sort of civilization has geared itself up, sort of manufacturing everything to try and cope with the dust cloud that's going to impact. People are going to be evacuated from the sort of where it's going to impact, which is the South African coastline. So they've all been evacuated from the south of Africa and all around the Indian Ocean and such like. So it's a bit of a different premise than some asteroid plot lines, I would say. But
yeah, you definitely have a whole other layer there with kind of digging into the mystery of the origin of man's evolution, which is totally cool. And in some ways, it seems to be reminiscent of A.G. Riddle's The Atlantis trilogy and his, I'm not saying the mysteries are the same, but just the exploring of it's the name of your series here, the exploring of those origins. Have you heard that kind of comparison before?
I've had a couple of people mention A.G. Riddle's books in sort of comparison to mine. I think we wrote them about the same time, actually. I know he gave me, well, not personally, he gave me good ideas, but I heard a podcast. You know Mark Dawson, don't you? Do you know Mark Dawson?
Yeah. Yeah.
I heard a podcast that he did with Mark Dawson, the thriller writer, and he sort of, I got some ideas. I needed to restructure my sort of title, my titles for my book a bit better, because I think it was a bit confusing for people, because the Revelations was initially called 2040 Revelations, and Dark Descent was initially called 2041 Sanctuary Dark Descent, and that was going to be part 1 of book 2 of Ancient Origins, and then the third book was part 2, book 2 of Ancient Origins. So it got confusing. I was doing it a bit like Game of Thrones, how he sort of titles his, but it really didn't work, and it just confused the hell out of everyone, I think. So I sort of switched that up a bit, which is so it's quite handy listening to I think, is it Jerry Riddle? I think his name.
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It was quite interesting listening to him, and it gave me some good ideas to sort of up my game a bit on the old sort of marketing front, I would say, for the books. But
well, I think in there, I didn't see them in their previous form, but in their current one, I'd say it totally works. You know, like you've got like a punchy, strong title, and there's mystery attached to it. So yeah, it's a big improvement, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I was quite pleased with how it's worked out. It was difficult to take the plunge, because you think, oh no, is it gonna work? Is it not gonna work? And then you think, I've changed the title of my books. Is anyone who's read the ones before going to find me, and all that sort of thing? But it seemed to not be too much of a problem, because it wasn't a massive change. It was just shifting things about, really. But
right, a distillation rather than a transformation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, you've clearly written some huge books. Is there one amongst the 6 in that series so far that stands above the others as being like, you're like, oh, this was a tough thing to get through?
The last one I've done is definitely the toughest one I've to get through. Yeah, without doubt. I was just there was a point where I was just staring at the screen for almost days on end, just going, what do I write? Where do I go from here? I was just staring at it. It was. I got quite depressed at one point about it, and I had to just take a step back and just and leave it for a bit, and just sort of just sort of clear my mind and then come back to it. But it was it was very, very difficult, this last book, I have to say.
Yeah, and it's was that a form? Because I think I had read somewhere where you had mentioned encountering a major episode of writer's block, and I think if I remember right, you talked about getting through it. Was this one, or was that a different occurrence?
Yeah, that was part of it. Yeah, that was that was the one, and I was just blocked for ages. I think it was more sort of a work-life balance as well. Because of my neck problem, I tend not to go out much, and obviously writing keeps you indoors anyway, so it's like a vicious circle, and sitting at a screen makes my neck a bit worse anyway, which makes me not want to go out, and then I'm indoors all the time writing this book that I just want to get away from. So I think that's what happened. So I needed to take a step back, and I think once you get a nice work-life balance, if you get writer's block and you've got a good work-life balance, then I think I was reading a good article in a writing magazine the other day, and it said it comes down to your craft, basically. And if you got writer's block and it's nothing to do with sort of personal life or anything, then it's going to be down to purely your craft and your story structure. And if your structure's not right, then you need to sort of go over it and sort that out if you have writer's block. I think I had a bit of both, to be honest. I had the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds. So.
And how long did that particular episode linger?
Well, it was sort of ongoing for months, it seemed like. Well, I think it was months, really. I think it was going on and off. I sort of solved a bit of a problem and then come to a grinding halt again. And then I solved another problem and then come to a grinding. So it was on and off for 4 to 6 months, I reckon, the block itself. I would say the main part of it was maybe 3 months, I suppose. I don't know, something like that. But yeah, it wasn't good.
That's gumption that you finally got through it. What was it? Just kind of a personal commitment to get through it? Like what ended up just pushing that cart forward?
Well, I had nothing else to do, I suppose.
Every time you walk by your screen, it's looking at me.
Yeah, get away from me. But no, that's what it was. Just I'd done so much before, and I thought, well, I've written 4 books already. I'm now, I think I was about 800 pages in. I thought, well, I can't write all that and not finish it. So it was just the sheer pressure of the books that I'd done before weighing down on me that forced me through, I think. But
hey, well, you got through it. And like you're saying, when you finished, there was a feeling of levity and freedom. So that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's definitely good.
Well, we've reviewed various aspects of what's tough about being a writer. What are some of the best things you like about being a writer?
Well, finishing a book, definitely. I don't know. I think just the whole process. I love the process I'm doing now, sort of editing it and going back through it and sort of seeing your work sort of complete, which is very rewarding. And then obviously bringing it out into a paperback when you get that hard copy is also really nice. What else is there? I suppose when you're writing something, when you've written something that you really sort of enjoy, that's obviously very rewarding as well. And I think because some of my books, obviously, they get quite dark. Because obviously I've had quite dark times in my life, and it's nice. I've had some people comment and say it's helped them through sort of dark periods of their life, that's sort of the best thing I could have hoped for, really, that someone would have found it sort of supportive like that. So that's definitely rewarding. So
yeah, that's definitely amazing getting that kind of feedback for sure. Well, if you could go back, you've been writing a few books now, and if you could go back to the Robert that was about to jump into Revelations, would you have any advice for him?
I don't think so, really. I don't think if I'd have, well...
He wouldn't have listened.
No, I wouldn't have done it. I've gone, who's this idiot? But I suppose maybe if I'd have had some advice, it would be sort of read up on the craft and sort of hone your writing skills more. But then that happened anyway, so I suppose really that it was the natural process, really. I think in life there's no real mistakes, is there? For any mistake helps you to learn, doesn't it? So
yeah, it starts to create who you are, continually who you are as a person, right? Right on. Well, you had mentioned finishing the ebook versions and paperback versions, but I noticed there aren't audiobook versions out yet. Is that something you're considering in the future?
Oh yeah. I've had a couple of people, or a few people now, that have asked me about the audiobooks, and I definitely need to sort that out. That would be my thing to do. I'll have these ebooks coming out, then I'll get all the paperbacks done as well. And then I'll be on to the audiobook, so it's non-stop, and then I'll probably have to start the next book after doing all that.
Well, the only thing, I've checked into audiobooks before, and I think I totally love audiobooks, so I want to do that as well. But man, I would say for books of your length, you're looking at a pretty penny or a pretty pound to get all that pushed through. Yeah,
I have looked. Yeah, it's going to cost, because I know it's a bit difficult to know which way to jump on it, because I know you can either go down a route where the firm takes a set percentage from your royalties forevermore, or you can go for a route but you have a small upfront cost, or you can go for a big upfront cost, and when you get the whole royalty virtually, I think you do get a whole. I think so. I think that's how it works, and then you get a much larger percentage for continuously, and then once it pays itself off, then you're making a lot more money from it, of course. But yeah, unfortunately, because my books are so long, I think I worked out one of them would cost me about $10,000, I think, to do, which is like, oh my god, that's quite a lot.
And that was your shortest book.
yeah. So it's gonna. I think I may have to go with the sort of the low cost one. I don't know. It's difficult to know, really. I may dip my feet in the water with the first one, which is the shortest one, and maybe do that one with the sort of bigger upfront cost, and see actually how much it will cost, perhaps, and then go from there. But
yeah, good plan. I'm definitely would be a fan and would love to check it out in that medium in the future. I wanted to ask about, so you're dealing with this condition. You had mentioned somewhere, I think I read, that you do different aspects to create kind of a holistic, healthy lifestyle, and that to a degree mitigates the symptoms of that condition. What kind of things do you do to deal with it?
Well, it's just really live healthy, basically. I think I've gone through sort of tried various diets out, and sort of water fasting as well. We just drink water for sort of 10 days or something with no food at all, and sort of just try and clear your system out. And
did you do that? Survive the whole 10 days?
Yeah. Some people do like 30 or 40, which is crazy and quite dangerous, I think. But you can sort of, and I don't drink. I hardly ever drink. Don't smoke. I used to smoke quite a long time ago now, and I keep fit with cycling as well. And I've sort of, although I've sort of waned a bit on the sort of meditation side, but everything sort of holistically, and that really helps. I think I may have found a cure for the condition as well, because it's actually, there's nothing physically they can find wrong with me. So what I think I found out it is, and not just me, I've sort of spoken to other people with the condition and other people in other walks of life, and it seems that it's when the car accident happened, you get sort of a trauma. It's called trauma release therapy that you can do, and the trauma actually get trapped in you as a form of energy. Mm-hmm, right. That energy sort of manifests as a physical condition. So it's sort of, I think they might call it conversion disorder or something. But if you can access the trauma, which I have done a couple of times, it feels like just imagine the most terror you could possibly have. It feels like so it's not the best thing, but if you can access it. And discharge that trauma, you can then cure. I should hopefully be able to cure my condition, but it remains to be seen whether I can do that or not. But
wow, that's exciting. I hope it works for you.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, it's not. It's quite. It may be a long shot, but I think it's the only thing I can see that makes any sense. I've seen sort of all the top neurologists in the country. They don't know what causes it. They can sort of treat the symptoms, but they don't know the cause of it. And the only thing I can think of is the trauma, really. So,
yeah, I think, the theory to me, at least, the overview sounds totally plausible, because the body is such a tight connection of our emotional experience with the physical aspect, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I know you get sort of different memories stored in different parts of your body, because I know they now, because they used to believe memory was just stored in the brain, but they don't think so now, do they? I know with transplants, people can get memories from the donor, can't they? And
no, I don't know. Is that really? Wow, that's...
Yeah. There's it's quite well documented. People get sort of, who never smoked before, suddenly start smoking like a chimney, or they start, someone who never used to do DIY started up totally doing DIY crazy and all weird things like that. No, it is, and so those sort of things. And I think there's other scientific sort of things they've looked at that shows that memory is stored sort of throughout the body rather than just in the brain, sort of thing.
Wow, that's cool. And you're talking about where something like that has happened. There, it's been like, I mean, I have no idea, like a heart transplant or something, and then these new kind of personality aspects come out.
Yeah. I think, or sort of a hand transplant or something like that. Anything really. So, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
It's totally cool. And it reminds me of, I used to live in LA, and we went to a exhibit called Body Worlds. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh man, totally amazing. It is, hopefully I'm going to describe it correctly here, but it is a scientist or somebody took cadavers that had been donated to science and then ran them through a plastination process such that he or she, the team of people doing it, could kind of isolate different aspects of the body, turn those into a type of plastic, and then, it's kind of gross, but melt away everything else. And then they bring all these different exhibits, pieces, sculptures, really, into a big display. And so you're kind of walking through these halls like at an art exhibit, but you're seeing like people exposed, the interiors in different ways.
Sounds quite gruesome, or is it not that?
Well, in some ways, it is rather macabre, gruesome, and stomach churning.
Fascinating as well, I suppose.
Yeah, and also, fascinating. Like, here's two ends of it. One of the things that I saw, which really actually made me a bit queasy and lightheaded, was a pregnant woman who, unfortunately, I'm assuming had passed from some condition with her baby, but they had kind of put her in a loving pose with part of her. Anyway, this is getting too probably intense, but when I saw that, I was like, I have to go outside and get some fresh air.
Someone passes out next to you. Yeah.
Right. On the other hand, there were things that were just straight cool. And like one of them, for example, was they had plastinated the entire nervous system. And so you got to see, and it was just looked like a kind of a cloud of branching veins essentially throughout the entire body.
Yeah, that does sound cool.
Oh, it was just beautiful. And the reason I bring this up is it reminded me of what you're talking about is like it sometimes we think like, oh, I've got a pain in my toe or something. There must be something wrong with my toe. But when you see the human body exposed like that, you're like, oh, no. Everything from, your left ear is completely connected to your right toe.
Yeah. I think it's always it's sort of all about perspective. I think, isn't it? It's obviously, as you say, everything in the human body is all one organism, isn't it? I think when you look at it in isolation, I think that's a problem sort of medical science has with some conditions. Obviously, they're quite far ahead with certain things, but in other conditions, they're sort of looking at it too much in isolation. And I suppose if they're going to progress, they need to sort of look at it as more of an entire organism and what's affecting what, really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Welcome to the Rorschach round, where we use ambiguously odd questions to delve deeper into the minds of these amazing authors. Let's get started. All right. So, Robert, if you're ready, we will jump into it.
Okay, I'm ready.
Here we go. Question 1. Has anyone ever made you mad in real life that you subsequently killed, maimed, or tortured in a book?
Oh my God. Oh, in a book. I thought he was going to say in real life.
No, not in real life. I mean, and if you did, no. You don't want to admit that over the show.
In a book. Well, no, I'm having to think now. That's worrying, isn't it? No, I wouldn't say so.
Well, that's good. And and your question actually just brought to mind that, how they say the human brain doesn't really know the difference between something you actually like in the physical world experience versus what you imagine. Have you ever heard that?
Say it again. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't know where the delineation falls exactly, but something about like when you imagine something in your brain is experiencing it as it is as real as something you do like in the physical world. So if you have actually killed, maimed, or tortured a character in a book from someone that made you in real life, it's kind of like doing it in real life, maybe.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. That's not too good.
Which makes me feel terrible because I have done it. So
no,
never again. Call the thought police. They're somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. So number 2 here. Question number 2. What's the number one thing you haven't done yet that you would love to do?
I wouldn't mind giving a speech to thousands of people. I haven't done that. That would be quite interesting. Although I would be absolutely terrified, so that may be not my number one thing that I would do.
Well, that would be part of the thrill, probably.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. So, all right. Yeah, I suppose. All
right, well, we'll try to, hopefully we'll try to, it'll happen, and then we can check.
In some ways I hope it does, in some ways I hope it doesn't.
Right. I bet you'd be great. It would be fun. All right. Okay. Question number 3. What would if you were to have one, what would your autobiography be titled?
A Pain in the Neck.
I like that. Yeah, that works on many levels.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Next question. I've lost count of the numbers, so I'm just going to say next. Here we go. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Teleportation.
Oh, that would be cool.
But say you could teleport to other sides, to other worlds, not just on the planet. to other galaxies and such like that. That'd be cool.
Yeah, that would be super cool. Would part of this superpower like protect you, or would you have to have like a huge space
I hope so.
suit on?
Otherwise, I'd only be doing it once. But yeah,
Right.
yeah, definitely protect me.
You're like, this is the best.
Yeah. Oh, that wasn't good.
All right. So next three questions here. These are just I forget what they call them, but they're kind of like the where you just jump in and say, whatever's off the top of your mind without much thought. All right, here we go. Annihilation or extinction?
Annihilation.
And singularity or singular rarity?
Singularity.
And today or yesterday's tomorrow?
Today.
Yeah. They don't always make sense. It's just, just to see how you react and what comes up.
See if I'm a psychopath.
Right. Really, I work for the FBI, but I shouldn't have told you that.
Oh, no.
Well, Robert, it has been a real pleasure chatting with you. Before we go, and we've talked about it extensively throughout the interview, but just to encapsulate it here at the end, could you tell us a little bit about I guess it's 2 books that you have coming up?
Yeah, it's the 10th Protocol and the Lost Prophet, and they're book 5 and 6 in the Ancient Origins series, and they will be both available to read on the 31st of March.
Very cool. And it sounds like but these 2 are tying up the series, or is there room for more adventures after that?
There's room for more events. There will be 2 more books, but if people do get fed up with it by that time, there is big resolutions in the 6th book, which will leave people hopefully quite satisfied. So yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Well, we'll get the show links in the show notes for that. And if people want to find out more about you and what you do, where should they go?
They could go to my website. That's sancturian.com. sancturian.com. I do need to sort my website out, I think, but that will have to do for now. But or they can go onto Facebook, and that's the page is robert.storey.ancient.origins, which is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But I need to sort that out as well.
So that's administrative work. It always comes after the creative work, or maybe should. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right on, Robert. It has been a real pleasure and honor to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Thank you so much to Robert for joining us on the show today. It was a lot of fun. And if you want to find out anything more about Robert and or the books mentioned, the 10th Protocol, or even the wonderful books he loved as a kid by Dick Kingsley Smith, I think the name was. Anyway, we have those links in the show notes at the usual place, www.williamoday.com/the number of the episode, which in this case is 18. That's it for today. If you would like to be sure to never miss a show and always have them immediately available on your device of choice, you can subscribe by going to www.williamoday.com/iTunes. And if you enjoyed the show, I would so appreciate a rating and review on iTunes. They both help with store visibility, and they also let other listeners know if this show is something that they might be interested in checking out. And I've made it easy to access both of those by going to the same link on my website, www.williamoday.com/iTunes. That will have a link there that you can jump over to either subscribe and or maybe all 3, rate and review the show. So I would so appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's it for now. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the OMG Book Show. You can find out more at www.williamoday.com.